Thank you for joining us for another week of trying out home church and helping to build this relationship between what we're trying to do with new ways of expressing church and new ways of getting involved in our faith and fellowshipping and learning, while at the same time, trying to actually have something that to many people feels, kind of maybe strangely familiar. We're really excited to have you with us and look forward to getting to know you guys a whole lot better. So that being said, I want to go ahead and get into this week's message. This week's message is focusing on something that I feel like has really, in a lot of ways, you could say it's almost a disease, and that's fear. Fear is something that I feel like, it's pretty hard to argue it's not all over the place. Over the last year, in fact, it has actually been a really big issue with a lot of youth in particular, where they have been seeing things on the news that they don't normally hear, or at the very least, they've been seeing their parents and other adults who are normally strong, unmovable individuals in their lives who are seeing the things on the news and they're reacting differently than they normally do. They're scared. They're running around. They don't know what to do. And because of that, it's causing a lot of them to start having these doubts in their own lives. So that being said, I took down a few things here, and we can talk about them as a home church group. So once again, I'm not there with you and everything, but just kind of join me here a little bit as we go through some of these things. The first thing I want you to do is this. Last week, we actually stopped first, and we kind of went through some scripture and then got into what the actual message was. But this week, I want you guys to just pause for just a second. And I want you to think about the different things that have caused people fear over the last year. And when I say fear, that can either be at a personal level. It could be fear from a perspective of them as citizens, as them as a part of a community, or any other form of fear. But just take a moment and talk about that for a second. What are some different ways that you have seen people experiencing fear? There's no doubt that fear has been a big part of the lives of many different individuals. And as Christians, I think this is something that it can almost kind of take us in a different direction. It can take us in a direction that maybe starts looking a lot different than the God of the Bible that we follow. And so when you look throughout the scriptures, you can see several examples where individuals were faced with situations where they had to face fear. The first thing I want you guys to go over in your own little groups and talk about is something that you end up seeing in Exodus, something you end up seeing with Moses when he is, talking with God, and all of the people of Israel start kind of going and doing their own thing. Now, this isn't so much about Moses and fear that he felt, but I want you to see how God reacts. Does God react with fear? Does he act uncertain? Does he act maybe a little bit hesitant about how the people of Israel are acting? So go ahead and talk about that scripture. Go ahead and read the story and think about how God acts and think about the strength, and how does that maybe differ from the way we see a lot of Christians react when the culture kind of turns against them. The second thing I have here for you is another story we see, and it's another example of where a lot of people today get very, very fearful. A lot of people talk about, being afraid of their governments, the authorities in their lives. You can see people talking about, I don't want to do X, whatever it is, masks, travel restrictions or whatever it is, because, certain people have told me I either have to do it or can't do it at all. A lot of people are very fearful over who their governmental leaders are. So that being said, go ahead and read this next piece of scripture and see if it doesn't resonate with you a little bit about what God's relationship is with the authorities of this earth. Okay, I have one final thing for you here, just going through these different examples. So we talked a little bit about when society and culture are against you with Moses. We talked about when the authorities and the governments maybe seem like they're against you. But what about when it's the church itself? What about when the church itself seems like it's so off kilter? And I hope this is something that, especially with you guys, given the very different format we're trying here, it resonates. What do we do when we start looking at the institutionalized church around us and we start saying, well, it looks like it's not really following God? Clearly, you guys are actually doing something about it, so you're on the right path, right? But go ahead and read this section from Malachi. See what God says through the prophet of Malachi and how God reacts to these institutionalized churches that are the temple that's supposed to represent Him, and how God reacts to them. Does He seem sorrowful, or does He seem to approach this challenge to His integrity with strength? Now, through every single one of those examples, the one thing I want you to pay very close attention to is that God is not deterred. God never approaches any of these situations or any of these obstacles from a position of weakness. He never gives the prophets and the individuals who are following Him a reason to sit here and think that He is not for 1 second totally in control. And this right here is where we end up getting to the crux of what my main message here is, and what I'm hoping people are able to take out of this. And that is that God does not want followers who are individuals that are going to succumb to this Christian variety of a victim mentality. In fact, what we see time and time throughout the Bible is a victory mentality. That's exactly what we see. And this is no less apparent than when you look at victory over death itself. Because after all, this is the one thing that nobody can escape. Nobody's going to escape death. And it's the one thing that anybody who has had the unfortunate and the gut-wrenching opportunity, I guess you could say, to have to actually hold somebody and watch life slip out of that person knows that despite the stories and despite poems and myths and things like that, there's not a lot of victory to be found in death unless you have something that's conquered death. Go ahead and read this next piece of scripture here and see what Paul has to say about our victory over death. What Paul says right there at the very end is really the whole main point. If I could just reiterate what that is, at the very end, he iterates, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the Lord's work, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." You see, despite the fact that the world wants to throw fear at us, Christians do not have a victim mentality. We have a victory mentality that is the result of being able to reflect a victorious God. You see, the God of all these crazy things we read in the Bible is the same God that you have dwelling inside of you right now. And because of that, it means there's no force on this earth that can stand up against you. It doesn't mean it's always going to be fun. It doesn't mean that you won't experience some fear and some sorrow and some regret and all these other negative things, but it does mean that we have something that can keep us moving forward. We have something that can motivate us to act for more than just what this world wants to throw in front of us. We have a God that wants us to have a victory mentality. The quote that I'll leave you with here is actually a quote from a journalist named Edward Moreau that many of you have probably heard before. And it goes something like this: "We are not descended from fearful men." Well, in the same way, we are not descended from a fearful creator. We are descended from a creator that is supremely in control of everything around us. And so as Christians, and the things that we do and the way we react to the world around us, that is the confidence that we can have, and that is also the high calling that we have, is to react to challenges in our lives with the same type of confidence, not because of us, but because we serve a God that's already conquered it all. Thanks again for joining us.